Hello, my name is Dr. Danielle Conway. I'm a veterinary nutritionist, and today I'd like to take a closer look at the World Small Animal Veterinary Association Global Nutrition Committee's guidelines for selecting a pet food. These guidelines were based on a volunteer committee of experts within the pet food community and are trying to help pet guardians select quality pet foods for their pets. I think that there are some areas of this guideline that would exclude smaller companies that are doing a really wonderful job and still present great options for your pet. We'll talk about why, looking at each individual question, and why in my guidelines that I've developed have chosen either to expand upon the question or maybe not ask it at all or shrink it down or reframe it. So the first question is, do they employ a nutritionist? So the WSAVA committee members think that the appropriate qualifications are either a PhD in animal nutrition or board certification by the American College of Veterinary Nutrition or the European College of Veterinary Comparative Nutrition. I would add to that a master's degree in experience formulating diets. I don't think it just has to be a PhD or board certification. There's many of my colleagues who do not get experience working in industry, and if they're hired right out of their residency without any experience in industry, would really require a lot of training to guide a pet food company that is feeding the masses. And I think somebody with a master's degree that is well qualified and has experience and worked with really excellent mentors would be just as well qualified. The committee also wants the company to disclose the nutritionist names, qualifications, and employment status. Unfortunately, as a nutritionist who consults with companies, most nutritionists won't allow this. And the reason why is unless you're working directly for them and you have control over the decision making of that company, we don't want our reputations and names tangled up in a company that we have no control over. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little bit of an industry secret. A lot of the nutritionists who work for companies also don't have any control over their products either. Unfortunately, a lot of the decisions are left to their boards. And a lot of the decisions are made hopefully on wellness and creating the very best product available. However, sometimes finances can be overly involved. And so it really requires a very honest, transparent company that will factor both in place. Of course, we need to have sustainable, responsible companies that can afford to keep their lights on and afford to pay their employees generously and make a profit, while also valuing making the very best product they possibly can to promote pet wellness and standing by that and actually living by their core values and ethics. Now, this line that a consultant may have limited influence compared to a staff nutritionist, I'm going to push back against that and say that's not always true. Having seen the inside of the industry, that's not always true. And I would say that, and I would add to this, is that if they have a consultant or a consulting company, there's several companies that companies can hire to help them with their nutrition formulation or safety or quality control and all the above that are ongoing retainer based. And I think that is needed. I don't think you need to have someone on staff. And I actually think that an independent contractor that they can't control, the company's not in control of, will provide sometimes even more actionable advice because they don't have to worry about their job being on the line. And as long as the company's working with someone on a regular and ongoing basis, that they didn't just have a nutritionist, PhD, master's, or veterinary nutritionist just formulate their diets and then leave, and that they have an ongoing relationship with them is just as important. So I would say that an experienced PhD in small animal nutrition, PhD, master's, or veterinary nutritionist, whether it's ACVN or ECVN, on an ongoing regular consulting basis, at minimum a couple times a year, more frequently in the beginning, is just as good as having someone on staff, and sometimes maybe even a little bit better because they don't have to worry about their entire source of income being from that one company. Not to say that it is a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing to have a nutritionist on staff. The companies that can afford it absolutely should. Some can't, and they should not necessarily be penalized for that or it's seen as a bad thing. Who formulates these diets? So this is similar to question one, and they think that the recipe should be developed by someone experienced, either a master's or PhD in animal nutrition, veterinarian, or is it a pet owner, breeder, trainer? Unfortunately, there's more and more softwares that are popping up that claim that they can generate balanced recipes, so more and more people who don't have the appropriate qualifications, credentials, or experience are getting false security that they can formulate diets when it's dangerous and it shouldn't be happening. The recipe developed, so I am in agreement with this, that the person who is operating the software first needs to be accurate. So it's not just about the person, it's about the software that they're using. And the software needs to be validated and accurate. That the recipe development is a complex process requiring knowledge of nutrition, raw materials, and processing, not taught in veterinary school programs. That is 100% true. So it shouldn't just be a veterinarian with an Excel spreadsheet. Their knowledge level needs to go beyond that. And in this case, sometimes my master's degree or PhD colleagues may in some cases have a better understanding about pet food formulation and the process than even my fellow nutritionists do, depending on the level of training and where they trained. Training and experienced formulators may have a degree, a master's and PhD in food science and technology to help guide ingredient selection and ingredient levels for health or disease management. I would also add to this that within both questions 1 and 2 that is not included is that the very best companies will use a team approach to development and also the implementation and ongoing support of their foods. It doesn't just take one person. It shouldn't just be one veterinary nutritionist. It shouldn't just be one PhD or master's formulator. It should be someone who is in charge of food safety, someone who is familiar with quality control and the steps that are needed to take to maintain a safe and repeatable diet, because we are making a food for the masses, not just one individual person. And depending on the type of food, whether it is extruded and whether it is retort and it's a canned product, whether it is fresh, whether it is raw, needs to have a advanced level of experience in that particular food processing methodology and how that processing or lack thereof will affect the diet. So I'm a big proponent for a team approach to the development and maintenance of scientific professionals behind the food, not just one person. I think these guidelines leave it to just one person, and the companies are really easily able to dupe people into false security, thinking that just because someone's looked at a diet once or that, or just having one person involved is enough. And it's really not. What is the quality control processes for ingredients and finished products? So I agree with this wholeheartedly. So that diets formulated to meet, AFCO or European Federation guidelines should be met, and should meet their nutrient profiles. Does the diet meet the profiles based on analysis? So is it based on laboratory analysis or chemical analysis of the finished product, or is it just formulated? So, and this is where, again, the formulation software is really, really important and needs to be validated, because some companies will say that it's AFCO complete and balanced for various life stages just based upon that formulation software alone without actually sending out the finished product for analysis. And that's a really important step. So both formulation softwares and pet food companies both need to be doing this really critical step at least once, if ideally on a more regular ongoing basis, because every time the ingredients are changed, this should be done. Anytime it's sourced differently, not even just changed. So let's say they source their chicken from Nebraska, and then in the next round they're sourcing their chicken from a different distributor in Idaho. They need to reanalyze the raw ingredient they're starting out with and the final product to make sure that still matches the formulation that their nutritionist provided them. So I would even go above and beyond that. Manufacturers and pet food providers should have adequate quality control to ensure companion animal and owner safety. I would also agree with that. So it should include ingredient, food, and supplement validation, final diet nutrient analyses, that's what we were talking about above, toxicology, bacteriology, and packaging shelf life screening. So this is also really important that I 100% agree with and want to highlight, is that a lot of companies will only test the product at the time it's manufactured to ensure that it's free of pathogens or that it's safe. Now, these companies need to hold these products and continue to test them. They also need to put them through a series of, let's say, tests that would be normally expected of that product. So it's getting shipped, it's getting maybe put in a store, it's going to a home. So just keeping it in a fridge at the warehouse is not really putting it through the conditions and environment that food is going to be exposed to before it reaches that pet's bowl. So I think that companies need to be doing that as well. That is not discussed here. And so really digging deeper and asking them exactly what they're doing can be very illuminating in deciding if this is a company that you can trust. The next question in the what to look for in a brand in nutrition is what kind of products or research or nutrition studies have been conducted? That's a really important question to ask. However, and these studies are very, very expensive to do. So really only bigger companies that have been around for a long time who have a whole lot of revenue are going to be able to do this. Also, fresh food is harder to make at a high enough profit margin to be able to do this. Not that they shouldn't, this does not excuse fresh companies in any way, but I will say it is harder to do this. So even fresh companies will have been known to cut corners and increase their profit per feed, like raising the levels of fats in the diet, etc. Maybe lowering protein content, maybe lowering fresh vegetable content, because those two things are expensive, increasing fat to make the product profitable. Not necessarily this is a bad thing, just things to be aware of. And so I absolutely think that companies should be striving for support of nutrition research and also academia. It could be as simple as supporting a summer research student project, an internship, a residency, and some base level diets. We're not talking about, lifespan study, nutrition studies here. It can be small, little pieces of information, good quality studies that are being utilized to move the brick of knowledge down the road for nutrition. It doesn't have to be big studies. If it can, great. But if not, any small piece of information and contribution helps. So pet food companies, it's true, they're not required to conduct or sponsor nutrition research in order to produce and sell a food. But when they do, it indicates a commitment to animal health and wellness. I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. What do we want to look for in a label? Nutrition adequacy statement. Is it a complete diet? Food should be labeled to indicate that they provide a complete diet with the required nutrients. Yep, I agree with that. So the label may also specify if it was a life stage. So is it meant for puppies? Is it meant for kittens? Is it meant for nursing mamas? Is it meant for cats who are pregnant? It should state that. Or the opposite is it short-term, intermittent, or complementary, meaning it's not balanced and it should constitute less than 10% of that pet's diet on a total basis. Does the food math match the nutritional needs of the individual dog or cat? Sometimes that doesn't happen, and I would absolutely agree with that. AAFCO and FEDIAC provide pet food manufacturers with recommended nutrient levels for different life stages. And diets labeled for all life stage are formulated for reproduction and growth. Now, I would argue that a diet that is all life stage is really not appropriate for senior animals because it has higher levels of phosphorus, higher levels of fat, and may or may not be appropriate for a senior diet. And this is where you should talk to your veterinarian to determine if a particular diet is appropriate for your pet. How many calories or grams of food in a serving? This is now legally required, so if there's a company that does not have the calorie requirement on the product, you can report them to your state agriculture department. Does the company provide immediate contact information such as phone number or email address? Yep, that is a legal requirement. Who makes the food? Do they make their own food or do they send it out? Now, this is something that I think is misleading. Let's talk about it. Sure, in a perfect world, the company would own their manufacturing and control soup to nuts everything about it. I can tell you right now that it's rare for all companies to do that, and that most companies are outsourcing this, and the ones that don't are huge companies with billions of dollars coming in the door and are owned by huge other companies and have a lot at stake here. So I really don't think this is a fair assessment of a company, and that most companies, even some of the big ones now, are outsourcing some part of their manufacturing process. And what's more important is that they know who's doing it and that they're outsourcing it to equally qualified other companies so that they have, and ask them for their COAs. So what's a COA? A COA is a certificate of analysis. And so we should be able to ask any of these nutrition companies for their certificate of analysis, whether it's for safety, bacteria, toxicology, toxins, heavy metal contaminations, the COAs and the specs from any of their co-packers as well. And they're verifying their quality control, their safety, and that have a commitment to ongoing and regular testing of these parameters, not just a one and done. So my takeaway is, and it isn't mentioned within the questions at all, is the COAs. Ask for the COAs. So overall, I think that these questions are a reasonable place to start. They don't go deep enough, and there are some areas that I think would favor a much larger company with a much bigger budget than a smaller company. And so that is why I created the Verity Nutrition Questions, which we'll talk about next. Happy feeding.